This video is sponsored by Ensight Solutions. Hello everyone, I'm Elise Thompson-Richards, Editor-in-Chief of Food Engineering Magazine. Today I'm chatting with Steve Mustard, an independent automation consultant and a subject matter expert for the International Society of Automation. Backed by more than 30 years of engineering experience, Mustard specializes in real-time embedded equipment and automation systems. He serves as president of National Automation Inc. and has served as the 2021 president of the ISA. In this discussion, Mustard covers how manufacturers are employing automation, pain points that can be alleviated by automation, and advice for starting or continuing on an automation journey. Let's get started. Hello, Steve. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
And so I'd love to start our conversation by getting to know you and your background a little bit better. How did you come into the world of automation, and how would you describe your experience with it?
I've been in automation for more than 35 years now. As you can tell, I've got no hair left. So I've worked in multiple sectors in different parts of the world. Started in the space and defense industry, and then I worked in energy and utilities, in water and wastewater and oil and gas. And I've also dabbled in transportation and food and beverage and basically most of the critical infrastructure sectors around the world. So I've worked in designing, developing automation systems, supporting them. And then also in more recent years, I've specialized in industrial cybersecurity. That's a big issue, of course. And then more recently than that, things like digital transformation, new technology like AR, VR, digital twins, and all of those kind of things. Automation is a huge topic now, so try to dabble in as many things as I can.
Absolutely. And it's huge for us in the food and beverage world, as I'm sure you've come to realize. And so, thinking about that and thinking about food manufacturing specifically, what are you seeing as far as implementation of automation? Where is it mostly happening?
I think the most food and beverage companies have probably invested quite heavily in automation over the past 20 or so years in fairly, what I would say, conventional parts of automation. So improving reliability, availability, improving quality. I classify those things like OEE type things, overall equipment effectiveness type measures. And so that kind of stuff has been going on for a long time. I think obviously in more recent years, especially with things like COVID and all of these supply chain issues, I think there's been a recognition that supply chains are quite fragile. And so manufacturers of all kinds of things need to think about, how they do manufacturing more efficiently, where they do that manufacturing. And I think that factors in, automation comes in there as well. And then I think the third thing that I've seen, again, probably more recent times, is a lot of focus on corporate social responsibility type things. So I'm thinking there of things like ethical sourcing, traceability. So automation can play a big part in that, tracking and tracing raw materials and final products and stuff. And then things like regulatory compliance, product safety, food safety is especially really important. Automation can play a huge part in that as well. So I think I would say automation plays an essential role in everything to do with food and beverage, really.
And in terms of the production process itself, do you have any experience or insight in where manufacturers might be implementing automation there?
Well, I think that generally in automation, especially manufacturing, and I think it will apply equally well to food manufacturing, is again, if you look at things like OEE, a lot of the conventional automation, I would say, has been there's certain levels, if you like, of automation that you can do, and in some cases, it was maybe limited by the technology that was available or the cost of that technology. I think that now that technology costs have changed dramatically, improved dramatically, and availability to technology, I think I see automation playing an even bigger part in that. So, for example, I would say things like vision systems for production lines. So a conventional vision system would be fairly rudimentary, would have would have some benefit, but it wouldn't have as much benefit as it could possibly have. I think now you can see the introduction of things like AI and machine learning, especially not only in the cloud and processing it with big expensive computers, but even at the edge, edge computing, combining that with vision systems, and then you can start to really improve on both the quality that's produced and then also in terms of timeliness of response, response to machinery issues and all of those kind of things. I think that those are huge. And I would say if I was in manufacturing, that's what I would probably focus on, is because they're always trying to squeeze out the last drop of profit, and they're trying to make everything and reduce wastage and increase yield and all of those kind of things. And I think automation is the thing that can really contribute to those things.
And from my experience in covering the industry, automation can also help with labor shortages,
Mhm.
and filling in where employees may not want to do difficult or repetitive tasks.
Right,
Have you
right.
seen that as well in your experience?
Very much so. So that's a huge area, and that's also a contentious area. So the first thing that people think about when they think about automation is getting rid of jobs, and that's really the wrong way to think about automation and people. Automation very much depends on people, and in many ways. So you hit on the right point, which is that what automation can do is take people out of both repetitive and dreary tasks that they really don't want to do and aren't really well suited to do because they're very repetitive and they make mistakes. And then secondly, from a safety point of view, so especially in the food industry, there's a lot of high speed processing required in a lot of cases. And it can be very dangerous. And so you really don't want to be putting people in harm's way unnecessarily. So automation can really help in that area. And then the people who are doing those jobs, we need people to do jobs to do with automation. All of that automation stuff needs to be designed, implemented, supported, and it needs to be operated by skilled people. And so instead of doing those mundane jobs, they can now do something much more fulfilling. And so I think it's a huge opportunity rather than a negative, which it's always portrayed as.
Definitely. And of course, we talked about like vision and quality, and we talked about labor. Are there any other pain points that manufacturers could turn to automation to alleviate?
Well, I think I touched on something about the supply chain. So I know every type of manufacturer has this kind of issue. So the things I'm thinking about here is firstly, where you manufacture and how you get raw materials to where you need them to, how you get finished product from where it is to where it needs to be. All of those kind of things we've seen with COVID and other things that they can be easily disrupted now. And I see now a trend of reshoring things, for instance, and people looking to say, well, let's manufacture closer to home or closer to where the product needs to be. But even that can be challenging because that could change, right? So where does the product demand and where's the product demand in 5 years' time? And if it takes 5 years to build a new plant, then you may have had a waste of investment there. But if you can design plants more modular, and we saw that with the pharmaceutical industry in response to COVID, they were able to stand up manufacturing plants for pharmaceuticals in incredibly fast times. And that's because they looked at how they build those plants and how they provision them. And then I think there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of standards out there that contribute to things like supply chain management. I'm thinking of things like ISA 95 and other standards like that that help us share information between different parts of the supply chain in a standardized way, which means that if you think about the bigger picture, that what you can say is that you could potentially say, today I'm going to manufacture my product in this part of the world, and then next week I'm going to need to manufacture in a different part, but I can kind of rapidly re-provision everything and do that more dynamically. So I see maybe that's the kind of future for a lot of things, is like reducing the size of facilities and making them more modular, and then making them more flexible so they can respond to demand from wherever it might be much more rapidly. Another point I was going to make, sorry, is I think energy, of course. Energy is a huge cost for any manufacturer, and food and beverage no different. And so energy costs are continuing to go up. And as well as looking for alternative sources of energy, we need to be much more efficient about how we consume energy, especially for the manufacturer. So again, automation plays a huge part in that, in terms of making the process more optimal. So you're reducing the energy demand you need to make the product. But also just, again, you're buying more modern products, buying more efficient products, and designing your systems more efficiently. That can be a huge impact in terms of the bottom line as well.
And I wanted to see if you had any insights around implementation of robotics. I know there are a lot of use of robotics, especially at the end of line processing in like palletizing and cartoning and the packaging side of things. Do you expect to see any more on the actual processing side? What have you been experiencing in that area?
Yeah, a good point. I think we already use robots and now cobots, collaborative robots, quite significantly in most manufacturing and distribution processes. And they've proven to be very successful for those kind of well-defined fixed tasks. Cobots maybe a little bit more flexibly, they can respond slightly differently. What I think might happen is that we might see a convergence of robots and cobots with AI and ML type technology, so that they can actually be much more flexible in terms of what they do. So instead of programming a very specific task for a simple robot, it might be something that the robot can actually do lots of different things, and it can actually somewhat make its own decisions about what it needs to do based on the environment. And that can actually really help improve things. Again, remember, it's not about taking people away, but taking people out of harm's way. For instance, if you think about some of those processes, if you can use robots to do them, then it's not going to risk people's harm, and also probably make the process more efficient, get higher yield out of things, less waste. And then again, so part of the thing would be being able to reprogram those robots or re-provision them to do something different the next day. And that's probably where this starts to get much more interesting.
Absolutely. And of course, you discussed all of the options that are available currently. And that made me think, like, what are some of the barriers that might exist for manufacturers to implement automation? Is maybe cost one of them,
Yeah.
or an abundance of options?
Well, cost for sure is always going to be an issue. You're talking about major capital investment, whatever you do. And so with organizations that are running on very tight margins, capital cost is a big issue. But I think your second point is probably more relevant, which is there's an abundance of technology out there. There's an abundance of solutions out there. There's abundance of companies offering solutions to manufacturers. And if I was a manufacturer, I probably wouldn't know where to begin because there's just too many options now. So we've gone from 20 years ago where we really wanted to be able to get this data and do this thing and be able to automate this thing, and we just couldn't because the technology either wasn't there or it was too expensive. Now we got all the possibilities, but where do you start? And what's the right investment to make? What's going to be the biggest return on your investment? And those are real challenges. And I think that if all manufacturers are not careful, what happens is that they make an investment, and if they don't plan it right, if they don't implement it right, that investment could be wasted almost, and then that actually deters them from doing further investment. So it's a real hard task to do. It sounds so easy, but it's actually not that easy to imagine how to do it.
And based on your experience, do you have any suggestions for overcoming something like that?
Well, I would recommend a modular, stepwise approach to this. So I would start with the organization identifying what they would want to achieve. That sounds obvious, but the reality is what people tend to do is say, well, I'm going to implement AI, or I'm going to implement some IoT solution, or I'm going to implement some robot solution. Now that's the technology, that's the solution. But what is the business benefit that you actually wanting to achieve by doing that? If you understand that, and if you can quantify that, and then you can work back and say, well, how do we achieve that? And as I'm sure you know, it's not just the technology, it's the people and the processes as well that you have to think about, right? So that's another thing that people often don't include in this process, is like they might buy the technology, they might pay a vendor to implement it and install it and even train people, but it's not about training, it's about cultural changes. For instance, it's about like how you change people from doing what they do today to what they should be doing, stopping doing what they shouldn't be doing anymore, especially. So there's a whole cultural part of this that needs to happen as well. That means you have to engage all the right stakeholders in this process as well. So, you can't just throw this technology on people and say, you've got to work more efficiently now. You have to kind of bring them along and make sure they're part of the journey and get their input into this about how it works and what doesn't work and things like that. So, and then I think, the last thing that I would recommend is that you don't bite off too much in one go. That's the other mistake that happens a lot is let's do everything at once. And it's too much. It's too much change. It's too risky. It gets delayed. It costs more and more. All of those typical things that you can imagine in a large project. But if you can have a vision about where you want to get to, and that might be over several years, but then take that journey in small steps and deliver actual business benefit in small chunks, people will see that small incremental improvement and they'll probably get behind it more than they would do otherwise, rather than waiting 18 months for some grand thing that might or might not deliver benefit.
Sure. And I mean, it feels like such a gigantic topic. I'm sure taking it step by step will make it easier. Do you have any other suggestions for a manufacturer, whether they're legacy or maybe a smaller operation, or they just haven't even started with automation yet? Do you have any other advice for them as far as thinking about this process?
Well, what I would recommend is there's a lot of information out there that you can get from vendors. There's a lot of information you can glean from the internet. You can watch YouTube videos and you can read books and other papers and stuff and try and work this out yourself. But I would highly recommend that anyone who wants to embark on this journey does this in a rigorous and kind of disciplined way. And the best way I would recommend to do that is to work with associations who understand this. So I am a volunteer with the International Society of Automation. They are, as the name suggests, a worldwide organization, and they do a number of things. One is that they develop technical standards. They also provide training and certification programs for people and products. And they also provide guidance in terms of white papers and position papers and articles in magazines, and then also conference proceedings where you can learn about case studies from people who've tried things and maybe they were successful or maybe they weren't successful, but you can learn a lot from them. And then obviously the networking that you get from them. I've worked with them as a volunteer for nearly 20 years now. And one of the reasons that attracted me was that I, as an engineer, want to know that the information I get is reliable and trusted. I don't want to go to the internet and read what somebody says and find out that it wasn't the right thing to do. So one of the things I get from ISA is that it is trusted information. So I can go, I can talk to people, and they will give me honest advice about things. And then I can also read standards where I can learn about how things should be implemented. So I can do things like more efficient alarm management, more efficient situational awareness, more efficient cybersecurity, better safety, all of the things that I need to do in my food production environment. And then I can, learn from others in other sectors as well, right? So I don't have to, just because they're not in the food sector doesn't mean I can't learn from them. I can learn from what oil and gas people do because they've got lots of money, so they can invest things. And I can learn from other people, like water and wastewater people, who don't have so much money, and find out how you make things work when you don't have very much money. So there's all kinds of things I can learn from that world. And that's what's really important to me. And I think that's what is really beneficial to organizations, that it's easy to, as I said, there's technologies out there, there's people who will sell you things, but how do you know it's going to work, and what do you do if you have a problem? So that's what I think ISA, for example, can help with.
Absolutely. I mean, collaboration is how we're going to move this industry and technology forward. And
Absolutely.
I think those are all the questions I had. Is there anything else that you'd like to touch on that we didn't already discuss?
No, I think it's good. It's a good question or set of questions to ask. I think all sectors have the same challenges. They might do things slightly differently, but in the end, everybody has the same questions. Everybody has the same challenges, and I think helping people along the way is really interesting. So I really like the idea of you doing this, because I think that will hopefully help your customers, your readers, point them in the right direction.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking your time and expertise and sharing it with me today.
Thank you. It's been great.